Hello everyone, doing some more work on the Bovaird and Seyfang. I did some work fixing up the bore the other day. There was some pitting in the front bottom part of the cylinder. The piston was about halfway down, spark plug was out, so the cylinder got some pitting, so I cleaned it up, JBWelded it. I haven't fully finished the job here. I need to sand off the excess JB weld, but I'll show you how I did it because I have to do it again on pretty much every bearing surface in the engine. What I'm working on right now are the lower crosshead guides. The parts of the guides are pitted, as you can see. The crosshead was stuck right about here on the engine when I got it. You could see it protected that pretty well, but right ahead of it some water collected because the crank guard was off, and we got some pitting. The crankshaft itself also has some, so I'll have to do that later. That's a project for another day. But basically you just want to get this down to absolute clean bare metal, as clean as you possibly can, and then get it nice and warm. Not hot, just warm, because it's a little chilly in the shop right now. If it was summer it wouldn't matter. And then spread in some JBWeld and let it cure. So I'm starting off with a wire wheel on my angle grinder. Get off as much of this as possible. You might want to use a hand wire brush to kind of get into the pits. Use some brake cleaner or carburetor cleaner, anything like that. Clean off all the excess dirt and grease and everything. Do a couple rounds of that, and then we'll use some acid to really etch all the low spots, because the real low parts of the pits you can't get to with a wire wheel. The wire wheel just hits the high spots, so we'll clean the low spots too with some acid so it's perfectly, totally clean. So here's the first round of cleaning done. I used a cup wire wheel and also the flat disc kind, and I tried to hold the angle grinder in a bunch of different ways, so sometimes the bristles were turning one way, sometimes they were turning the other, to try to get into the pits as much as possible. And then in little corners I used a hand brush, even though this area here, the crosshead doesn't slide up that far anyway. I'm really not too concerned. I'm more concerned with like maybe about here and back. Anyway, I wire wheeled it as best I could, and then I followed up with some carburetor cleaner, and I just washed it off as well as I could. And now it's time for the second phase. We're going to lay a rag here and put some acid on it to etch all that rust out. Alright, so we got the acid cooking on here. I put some rags on the bearing surface to hold the liquid. I folded them up just right. I used a squeezy salad dressing bottle to gently apply it and let it soak in. And this is acid, of course, so make sure to wear gloves and safety glasses in case anything splashes and you don't want to burn your skin. But hey, good luck finding these things with the artificial scarcity caused by the media. I've got a connection. This is the acid, muriatic acid, which I believe is a hydrochloric acid. Got this at Home Depot. I believe it's used for, cleaning concrete patios and stuff. And it does make some pretty stanky fumes, so you might want to do this in a, nice open, ventilated shop. You can even see some steamy shit coming off there. I'm not really sure what that is, but I'm sure it's excellent to breathe in. It probably kills the coronavirus. Well, while that's cooking, I just gave it a second application. I am doing some work on the cylinder end of things. I'm just sanding it. Starting off with hand sanding it. I have a block, long block, and I put a rag in there to kind of make this flat surface hopefully a little bit more rounded and fit the contour of the cylinder. I suppose if you had the tools or ability or time and desire, you could cut a piece of wood with a shallow radius on it to fit the radius of the bore. But this seems to be working pretty well. Just doing it by hand at first, because this cylinder hone that I made, just made it with a bucket. I have a hole in here for a threaded rod to attach to a drill. You just double nut it into that hole and tape on pieces of sandpaper. And it works really well, but it's really decent for just removing surface stuff. It's really not going to, I don't think, remove this hard JBWeld, because I've been scrubbing at this for a while, and even these really thin little bits of JB, like right here, it wouldn't really remove it. I'm scrubbing this pretty hard by hand, and it hasn't gotten rid of it all the way. This is just excess that I want to get rid of. There's nice metal underneath there. That's just excess from when I squeegeed the JBWeld into the pits. I tried to go as conservative as possible, just get as much into the pits and get rid of all this excess when it was still wet, but there's still some, of course, that is there. So scrubbing this by hand with sandpaper. I don't know what grit this is. I don't know, it's fairly coarse stuff, and it's taken a while to remove, so just keep going at it, and once you're closer to being done, you can use a hone. Or if you have a smaller bore, of course you could just use one of the regular stones or a dingleberry hone or something like that, but I couldn't find anything for this 12.5-inch bore. Well, this part is coming along fairly well as I'm waiting for the acid to do its thing over there. I've given it a couple applications. I've also lifted up the rags because they kind of bubble, because the acid makes some sort of a gas, I'm not sure what. I'm sure it's good for you to breathe. Lift it up or just push the bubble out so that wet rag is right against the metal and the acid's doing its thing against those rusty pits. But in here I've been sanding with the block, and I started having issues really getting the sides done because it's just such a large area to sand with that block. So I've graduated to this. I just put a rag inside the sandpaper, and when I squeeze it, you know, it keeps its straight form, but it kind of curves a bit, so you can get a little bit more force just right in one area, and it's been a lot more effective at sanding away little areas like this, where, like I said, there's good metal under here. There's no pit, but it's just excess from when I squeegeed the JBWeld. Well, honestly, I was a little disappointed with the acid. It cleaned a fair amount, but in the real low parts of the pits there was still rust. You can't see it now because I've cleaned it up and I re-wire wheeled it. I also used a pick and went at each individual big pit and tried to pick out some of the really low-lying rust. And I wire wheeled it again. It looks really good now, but I've noticed that if you have something rusty, if you go over it with a wire wheel, there's a lot of times it gets really nice and shiny and gray like this, even though it still actually is rust. So be aware of that. So it's cleaned and wire wheeled again, and I'm going to use my the other secret weapon I have is oven cleaner, heavy duty oven cleaner. It has lye in it, and what's really cool about that stuff is that it attacks oxidation, but it does not attack base metal. So unlike an acid, if you use an acid, it'll keep eating and eating away, and it'll, if you have some clean metal nearby, the fumes will rust that metal. Obviously not an issue on this engine, but it's something to keep in mind. But I'm going to use this oven cleaner. It's nice because it sprays on, it's kind of thick and bubbly, and I don't need to use the rag, so let's give that a try. Well, sanding the cylinder is just about done. As you can see, I got a lot of that off. There's only very little left. That's because there's only that many pits and low spots. Now you'll notice there are a few darker spots, like you know, right there and over there. Those are spots that are extra low and they have not been hit by the sandpaper. So what I think I'll do when I mix up some JBWeld for the crosshead slide, I'll do an extra layer on here, but just a real spot treatment just on those dark extra low spots. I think even as it is now, it's probably fine, but why not? You're already here, you're already doing it. It's not like this has to get running by a certain time. You got all the time in the world. So take your time with it. So I'm going to touch up those little bits there. Now here I got the second go around of oven cleaner going. This is the stuff I'm using, easy off, heavy duty, works really well. Again, you're going to want to wear gloves. This, since it has lye, has a pH of 14, or lye does anyway, it'll definitely give you a chemical burn on your skin. So be careful with it. Spray it, let it soak for a while, and then I went at it with this little steel bristle toothbrush. And it's a little time consuming, but I just move the toothbrush one way and then a different way and then a different way to, again, work the bristles as deep into those pits as possible. And you'll notice that the first go around, the goop that you make when you brush it is real black or brown, just discolored. But as it gets cleaner, around your second or third treatment of this, it just kind of turns gray. It doesn't really get as discolored, and that's a little hint that you're getting pretty clean at this point. Well, I'm giving it a scrub after the second squirt of oven cleaner, and you see the scrubbed portion, it's pretty clean. It's just a grayish goop. It's not, you know, brown and nasty like the first go around. You see this area here right at the stud, I didn't clean that area quite as much, and you can kind of see the color difference between right there and over there. So there's a little more rust on the end, but that doesn't really matter. So I think this is about as good as it's going to get. I'm going to give this a good scrub, wipe it off, wash it down. I got some plain water here in the squirt bottle, clean it, and then go on to the next cleaning step. Well, I'm pretty happy with that. That is just about as clean as I think it's ever going to be, right down to bare metal. So I obviously wiped it down, washed it with some water, hosed it with some carburetor cleaner, and wiped it off with a clean rag. Keep using clean rags at this point. Don't reuse dirty rags, because we want to make sure this is super, super clean. Go in stages, dirty, medium, clean. So anyway, this is cleaned with carburetor cleaner. Now we're going to go to the last stage, some acetone, more clean rags, and we're just going to go until the rag stays clean when you wipe it. The first wipe or two might be a little dirty, and if that's the case, another rag, more acetone, and get it perfectly clean. Okay, so I preheated the surface with my propane torch there. Two things. Firstly, all the acetone that's still sitting in there, believe it or not, it will immediately and rapidly catch fire when you hit the flame on it. Secondly, don't direct the flame directly on the bearing surface or whatever you're going to JBWeld. I learned this when I did the cylinder, because propane, when it burns, it has a lot of water as a combustion byproduct, so that water will condense on the cold cast iron. It will eventually evaporate, but not before it gives a light surface rust on the metal. So I directed the flame on the side here and let it kind of lick up, and as you see, it's still nice and clean. So it's, you know, I can touch it, not for very long. It's a little hot, but by the time you get the JBWeld mixed up, I'm sure it'll be just right. So I just applied a layer of JBWeld here. As it turns out, it was actually a little too hot still, so I'm going to wait to do the other one for it to cool off to, I don't know, 80 degrees maybe. This is almost there, because the JB just flows and gets too liquid, and it doesn't, when I squeegee it, it doesn't stay nice and level. I'm just using a little piece of a paint stick, paint stirrer, nice hard sharp edge to level everything out. And I also did the same thing in the cylinder on the spots. course, I guess I did get a little overzealous again. I only treated the spots, but when I tried to scrape away the high lumps of JB, it smeared around. So I got a bit more sanding to do after this, but it'll come out really nice. Well, there you have it, everybody. They got the JBWeld on there, squeegeed in. I'm going to let this cure. It's still a little bit cool in the shop. It's early spring, so I'll let it sit for about a week. And I'm going to save that piece of cardboard that I mixed the JBWeld on so I could poke it and take a look at it and see how it's curing. So I don't, poke this and damage it or scrape, mess it up or whatever. And after it's good and cured, I'm going to sand it with a block. Might end up taking these studs out so I can more easily sand all the way to the end. And I feel, at least with this one, there was a lot of pitting right here. This one will probably require a second layer just like the cylinder did. This one is pitted a little bit less. I think this might be good the first go. And I'm also not as concerned about residual low spots, because like with the cylinder you need to hold compression and any low spot is a little blow-by spot. But here on the crosshead, all you want is a nice flat smooth surface for that crosshead to slide back and forth on. With too much pitting it'll ruin the babbitt, but if there's just a little smooth hole or divot, it'll just retain a little bit of oil and it'll be just fine. So that's it. That's how you do it. Let this cure. I'm going to do the same thing with this as I showed you with the cylinder, and that's how you can fix an old rusty pitted engine with JBWeld. And this really is like the only option for something like this. This is a big engine. Unless you had a huge mill or something, machine of some sort, you couldn't really remachine this. There might be another option out there. I toyed with the idea of putting a thin piece of steel on here and re-pouring the babbitt to accommodate for the thicker piece of metal there and using that as the sliding surface, but I think this will be just fine. And if it ruins the babbitt on the crosshead, which I don't think it will, I can take it apart and do something different. But I hope that doesn't happen. I don't want to take it apart. I don't think it'll happen. I think this will be perfectly good fix. We did an excellent job cleaning and preparing and putting the JB in there. You'd be patient, take your time, and that's all there is to it. So the cylinder is on its way to being done. The crossheads are on their way to being done. Next thing I gotta do is take the flywheel off. See, I got some wedges in there to help the oil seep in. I have to take the flywheel off so I can take this gear side shaft gear housing off that way, because there's these studs holding it on. Then I can lift the crankshaft out, and the crankshaft is pitted in the same way. Not that bad, but I would definitely not want to run it this way. I think I would ruin the bearings pretty quickly, so this will have to get taken out. I can clean the lower bearings, do the same JB treatment on here and on here. This is pretty crusty, unfortunately. It's really a shame. This engine really seems like it doesn't have that many hours on it. It was just taken out of service, crank cover taken off and left outside for 30 years or 40 years or something. It's a real shame, because this would have been a really nice engine if somebody took just a little bit more care of it. But anyway, that's all there is to it, everybody. Thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a thumbs up if you like this video. Hit the subscribe button if you want to watch more and keep up to date with all these projects. And that's about it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and come on back for more.